Amen. Thank you to our band. Amazing. So, yeah, we can thank them. We're blessed. We're going to worship with all of you this morning. Today, as Josh said, we're starting a new series through the book of Joshua. And I wanted to let you know that we have a book here that's by my father on the book of Joshua. We're making that available. My father, he passed away in 2019, but for those of you that heard my father preach, maybe almost every time he preached at the Grove, it was from the book of Joshua. He was a Joshua fanatic. For 40 years, he taught Joshua at African Bible College across the continent. Every year he taught the book of Joshua. For 50 years, he had a radio program called Bible College by Radio, and one of the books of the Bible that was his favorite to teach that went across the continent of Africa, still does today, is the book of Joshua. Some of my favorite sermons that I've heard him preach are on faith from the book of Joshua. So when he passed away, he had started writing a book on Joshua, and he had gotten to about chapter 4 before he left earth. And so my mother and I pulled together his sermon notes. We pulled together his class notes, transcripts from his Bible College by Radio lessons, and we finished the book, Faith in Action, God in Motion. So this is on Joshua, and thank you, Brian. And I'd love for you to have a copy. They're in the lobby here, they're in the coffee shop, but it's a chapter by chapter study of the book of Joshua. So Joshua opens with Moses having just died. So grab your Bibles, we're going to start in Joshua chapter 1. And Moses has left the scene, and God is picking a new leader to lead the people of Israel into Canaan, into this promised land. And we read this, I'll start in verse 2. Moses, my servant, is dead. And this is God speaking to Joshua. Now you and these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot. Be strong and courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have success wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. This is one of my favorite texts in all the Bible. The book of Joshua, like I said, it's about God choosing a new leader. Moses had chosen 40 years earlier to not take the promised land. Why? It was because they lacked courage. People said there's giants in the land. We look like grasshoppers. So because they lacked faith, because they lacked courage, Moses never gets to experience the promised land. Then God comes along and he chooses a leader who's full of courage. And there's not too many people like this in the Bible or even today, but he picks this man called Joshua. And if you remember going back to Numbers chapter 13, Moses had sent 12 spies into the promised land. And they came back, and 10 of them said, there are giants there. We're all going to die. Bad things are going to happen. Except 2, Joshua and Caleb said, we can do it. We've got God on our side. But nobody listened to them. But now God has chosen Joshua to be the leader and take the people into the promised land. I think every once in a while, you meet someone who has this quality of courage. I think most people live rather pedestrian, ordinary lives, but then once in a while you meet someone who actually starts to do the big things that God calls them to, and it's people like Joshua. Joshua, in my opinion, is that guy that you want next to you if you're in trouble. Like if you're in high school or you're in college and you got people after you, you want Joshua, all right? You want Joshua right there, because Joshua is that kid that at 10 years old, he was driving his dad's tractor, around the farm. Joshua is that guy that had a mustache in 8th grade. Joshua is the guy that you don't want to mess with. And Joshua, I think God picks him because he's this person of courage. And I have this key idea on the screen because this is kind of a theme, not just for chapter 1. This is a theme that permeates the whole book of Joshua. Courage is a faith essential. If you desire to do anything new or important or daring in the name of God, then you must accept his challenge, believe his promises, and take courage. But I want to start here as we start reading chapter 1. Courage is what we're called to, but the problem that we read of in chapter 1 is fear. And the challenge is to fear no more. This is exactly what God says. I know Josh has it in a song, but God said it first. And here's what we read in verse 9. We read, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Fear no more. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord God will be with you." Listen to how this verse reads in the Living Bible. Verse 9, "Be bold and strong. Banish fear." I really like that. Banish fear and doubt. Fear no more. I think Moses failed not because he lacked vision. Moses didn't fail because he was a poor planner. Moses didn't fail because he was disorganized. Moses failed for one reason, because he lacked courage. And I think the wall that keeps all of us in our desert places, like the nation of Israel for 40 years, that wall is built out of fear, isn't it? I think fear has a way of keeping us in places that we don't want to be. We end up spending our time with people we don't want to be with. And it's fear. And I want to remind you today that everything you want in life that God has for you is on the other side of fear. I want to remind you that the biggest things that you do in life, the most important things that you do in life, are on the other side of fear. Fear says things to you. Fear is always whispering in your ear, isn't it? Fear is saying, don't try it. Fear is saying, play it safe. Fear says, it's not going to work out. You're going to lose it all. Fear says, stay where you are. Fear has a way of keeping us stuck in the wrong places with the wrong people, doesn't it? And this is exactly what happened to the nation of Israel. For 40 years, they're stuck. Fear is an excuse generator. It keeps saying things like, there's giants in the land. You're just a grasshopper. I want to remind you of this today. Fear is a liar. If you hear fear whispering to you, it's a liar. Fear will say things like, you can't do this. Fear will say, you don't have enough experience. Fear will always say, you don't have enough money. When you start listening to fear, you end up being stuck in the places where you don't want to be, where God is not using you. I know that I felt this way 18 years ago when we were starting this church. As many of you know, we started meeting in a school, junior high school gym just down the street. And I had read that 85% of churches that meet in school gyms fail. All right, that's all right. Let me say that again. 85% of churches that meet in school gymnasiums fail. So I knew we had to get out of there or we're all going to die. I just knew we're all going to die if we stay here. And so not only did we buy this land the first year, but I started to try to put together plans to build buildings, to build a campus. And right away, I had people saying, oh, the school is fine. We can say, I had one leader come to me at the time and say, Palmer, you know what? I think we could stay here for 10 years. I'm like, we're not staying in a gym for a decade. And so in spite of that encouragement, I started to try to compile plans. But to build our first 3 buildings and to develop this land, put in the underground and the parking lots, I was given estimates of around $3 million. And I don't know if you know this about a full set of plans, but I also was told at the time a full set of plans will cost anywhere between 5 and 10% of the project. Do you know how much that is? That's about $200,000 to $300,000, and we had $30,000 in the bank. So anyway, in spite of that, I was like, well, we got to get plans. We got to get plans. So I started calling anyone that I'd known my entire life that knew anything about engineering and architecture to see if they could help put together plans. The first guy I called was Scott Emerson. I grew up in Africa with Scott. He was a missionary kid, and he's an electrical engineer. He lives in Huntington Beach. And I called Scott. I said, hey, Scott, we need electrical plans. Can you do that? He said, sure. I said, well, how much do you charge? He said, well, I usually charge $1,000 a sheet. I said, how many sheets do you think we'll need? He goes, oh, at least 10 or 15 sheets. I'm doing the math. That's $10,000 or $15,000. And I said, oh, Scott, I don't know if we can do that. And I knew he was from Africa, and in Africa, everything's negotiable. So I said, hey, Scott, how about $100 a sheet? He said, that's fine. So we did $100 a sheet. And then the next week, I'm at Kinko's, and I'm starting to Xerox some drawings that I'd drawn up to show an architect. And I see a guy on the next machine over, and he has a set of blueprints that he's Xeroxing. So I go over, I say, hey, what's your name? His name's Dana, great guy. I said, Dana, what do you do? He said, I'm a civil engineer. I said, ooh. I said, we need civil plans. We need drainage and grading plans. And he said, okay. And as we're talking, I'm telling him about our church. He goes to Redemption Church. And I said, Dana, so what do you think you would charge? And he says, well, like for a 1-acre Walgreens, I charge $5,000. We had 20 acres here. I said, oh my goodness. I said, Dana, how about, how about $1,000? Can you do that? Dana Wheeler said yes. I'm just going to tell you that. It was a gift from God. You don't know till you ask, do you? You don't know. And then we needed an architect. And we had a terrible criteria for our architect. It wasn't the best architect in Phoenix. We were looking for the cheapest architect in Phoenix. And I found a guy that would do the architectural design for $5,000. I thought, okay, I was trying to do the whole thing for under 10 grand. And so he agrees to do it. He gives us a set of plans. We make our first submittal to the county, and they kick it back with all kinds of red lines. So I call him up and I said, hey, I've got to show you the red lines. He says, oh yeah, my contract didn't include red lines. I said, what? I said, well, how much should we pay you extra to make the corrections? He says, I don't want to do the corrections. This is what happens when you get the cheapest architect in Phoenix. And I said, well, what should we do? He said, well, you find a draftsman, anyone that knows AutoCAD, and then have them make the changes. Then let me know. I'll meet you in my work parking lot. Bring a $100 bill, and I'll stamp and sign them. Okay, I'm not making this up. This is how it went. And so I said, well, how much do draftsmen charge? I said, do they have to be a PE? And he goes, a professional engineer. He goes, no, you just need anyone that knows AutoCAD. I was like, ooh, bingo, I could learn AutoCAD. And so sure enough, I found that there's a free version, 30-day free trial of AutoCAD. It's just from Jesus. And I downloaded that thing. And I started making the corrections myself. And I'd meet him in the parking lot with a $100 bill, and he'd stamp and sign. And you know what? It sounds crazy, but for less than $10,000, we got all of our plans done. I just share that because you will try to do something important. You will try to do something meaningful and big. And you will have people tell you that you can't do it and you don't have enough money. Fear says that. And I want to say, take courage, because fear is a liar. You can do the things that God calls you to do if you will fear no more. I wonder, thank you, I wonder right now, what is creating fear in your life? Because for all of us, when Josh asked for a raise of hands, almost everyone in the room raised their hand. I wonder today, is it the fear of criticism in your workplace that is creating anxiety and fear in you? Is it the fear of telling a friend, no, you don't want to be a part of it? Is that creating fear in your life? Because all of us fear something. Maybe for you, you fear a sickness or a diagnosis. Maybe you have fears in your marriage because something isn't working out right now. Maybe you have fear for your children and their safety. Maybe you have fear in your finances. You feel like you can't make it. I want to challenge you to say, bring that fear to God, because it's in our fears that God meets us. There's a good in fear. We think fear is bad, but there is a good in fear. We see it in the Bible over and over, that when God's people are afraid, it forces us to turn to Him. It forces us to come alive to His presence. When you're afraid, it forces you to trust God with the things that are creating fear. My invitation to you today is to fear no more. Let me read verse 9 again from the Living Bible. Remember this: be bold and strong. Banish fear. Banish doubt. So if the problem is fear, then I want to challenge you today to take courage. That's the invitation in Joshua chapter 1, that we all will face things that make us afraid. So take courage. In Joshua 1, verse 2, God gives this daring challenge to Joshua. He says, I want you to cross the Jordan River with all the people. Now, crossing the Jordan River had two big challenges with it. One, we'll read in chapter 3 that the Jordan is at flood stage, all right? And it's a raging river. It's at least 100 feet across. Who knows how deep it is? The second one is when they cross the Jordan River, now they're going to have to fight the Anak giants. Now they're going to have to take on 6 other nations that want to fight them as well. So it's a challenge that's full of trouble. And so God says, take courage. Let me read this again. This is verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous, God says. God says this over and over. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Have you noticed this? Now, I said that most of us have fear, but there's a population in this world that lives with no fear. One are kids. Kids seem to have no fear. They jump off furniture. They jump off coffee tables, couches, dining room tables. They'll jump off anything, right? They have no fear. 20-year-olds, anyone in their 20s has no fear. They go rock climbing, skydiving, bungee jumping, firewalking. Why do they have no fear? Their brains are not fully developed yet, are they? They're still underdeveloped. They haven't made enough mistakes to have a lot of bad memories and injuries in their lives that won't heal, but most of us have them. And here God is saying to Joshua, take courage. Fear says, when you're afraid of something, it says, you don't know what you're getting into. But courage says this, you don't know what you're missing out on if you don't take it. Courage does not mean you're not afraid, all right? Courage does not erase fear. I lay awake at 3 in the morning. I end up with a knot in my stomach half the time because of the things we're trying to do at the Grove that create fear in my life. But courage is simply the willingness to keep pushing forward in spite of those fears. Courage is a willingness to trust God instead of giving in to those fears. Courage reminds us of this. Courage says, let's go. Courage says God's best life is on the other side of that river that you're afraid of right now. And God says to Joshua, take this promised land. You can do it. God says to Joshua, you've been in the desert too long. It's time to get out of here. But he says it's going to take courage. So my invitation to you is to stop taking it safe. God made you to live a courageous life, a brave life, a daring life. And maybe you've been afraid to. I want to say now is your time to do that. Our tendency, like I said, is to play it safe, right? In our country, we don't say to our kids, hey, go play in the street. We don't say that. We don't say, hey, text and drive, or you don't need a seatbelt today. We don't say any of those things. We say, drive careful, look both ways when you cross the street. But how does faith grow? Our faith and our courage grows with every step of faith that we take. It's kind of like this. For moms and dads here, let's say you have a kid who wants to learn how to swim. And so you get in the pool and you have your son or your daughter stand on the edge of the pool. And you get in the pool and what do you say? You say jump. Now, your son or your daughter has just one of two choices. They either jump or they walk away. And with either choice, they learn something. They learn a lifetime lesson. If the son or the daughter stands there and they jump to you, their father or their mother, what do they learn? They learn that you are big enough and strong enough to catch them. They learn that you can be trusted. They learn that you will make sure they don't drown and get hurt when they jump. They learn something. If that son or daughter stands there and you say jump, but they are afraid and they choose to walk away, they also learn something. Do you know that? What do they learn? What they learn that they don't know if they can trust you. And that can last the rest of their life. They're not sure if you are one that can be trusted. It's like that with God. If we take that step of faith, we learn that he can be trusted, that he can catch us, that he can take care of us. Once, as an individual, when we take that courageous step of faith, we never look back. We've seen what's on the other side. I want to remind you today that nothing innovative in your life will happen without courage. You won't do anything new in life without courage. I want to remind you that you won't do anything creative in life without courage. And so the invitation is to take courage. And I wonder today, when you look at your world, your life, what do you need courage in? For example, maybe today it will take courage for you to stop a wrong. Or maybe it will take courage for you to speak up for a coworker who's being treated poorly. Or maybe it will take courage for you to do justice. Maybe it will take courage for you to say no to a temptation. Maybe it will take courage to say no to friends who are trying to drag you into a temptation. Maybe it will take courage for you to say no to a son or a daughter in a decision that you know is not good for them. Maybe it will take courage to say no to your in-laws. I don't know what it is, but we all have something that we need to take courage in. And this lesson in Joshua is take courage. Maybe you have a friend or a coworker that needs to know about Jesus Christ. It will take courage for you to tell them about Jesus Christ, so take courage. Now, as we read Joshua 1, we don't say take courage flippantly. We take it because there's grounding to it. And so I want to say this next. Let's put this on the screen. God's presence and his promises are your source of courage. Your grounding for courage is God's presence and his promises. The Bible is filled with God's promises. God is a promise maker, and he's a promise keeper. As we talk about moms and dads, isn't it true that when you make a promise to your kids, they don't forget that, do they? They hold you to that promise. I've learned that the hard way as a father. When we first moved here, 20 years ago, my kids had seen Men in Black, and they're all asking for a pug. And all four sons want a pug. So I say, okay, we're going to get a pug, but we have to get a house. You know, we're trying to buy a house. It has to close. And so I said, after we get a house. So we get a house. We move in the house, and they said, Dad, you promised a pug. And so I said, we got to get some grass. As soon as the grass grows, we'll get a pug. So now we'd been in the house 4 or 5 months. We're all sitting down at dinner, and the youngest one, he's in kindergarten. And he says at dinner, it gets quiet, he says, Dad. And I don't know where he got this accent, but when he was in kindergarten, he had like a New Jersey accent. And he says, he did, it's crazy. He said, Dad, you a liar. That's what he said. I said, I'm a what? He said, you a liar. I said, I'm a liar. I said, why you say I'm a liar? He was very direct with this. He said, Dad, you promised. You said when we get a house, we would get a pug. We have a house, and we don't have a pug. He said, you said that when we get grass, we would have a pug. And we have grass, and we don't have a pug. You a liar. And I was like, oh, my word. And so I said, okay, I'm on it. I'm on the pug. So that weekend, Veronica and I started looking for a pug. Fortunately, it was near Christmas. And so on Christmas morning, Veronica filled a basket with little pug beanie babies. And then in the middle was a real little pug the size of a beanie baby. It's the best Christmas ever. But I learned then, you don't tell your kids that thing unless you mean it. You better darn well keep your promises. Here's the thing with our Father in heaven. He's a promise maker, and he's a promise keeper. Look, I want you to look at a couple of verses with me. Verse 8, keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, and so that you'll be careful to do everything that is written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. Do you see that promise there? If you take the word of God seriously and you keep it and you live it, then you'll be prosperous and successful. And then not only does he have promises, but he promises us his presence. Look at verse 9. I've commanded you, don't be afraid. Move down to the end of this. I will be there to help you wherever you go. This is the promise of the presence of God. So when I say take courage, when God says take courage, it's rooted in his promises and his presence. God promises to be with Joshua. He promises him this promised land. In chapter 1, as we go through it, I wrote down some of the promises that are there. Look at just the promises in chapter 1. He says, cross the Jordan River into the land I have promised you. This is why it's called the promised land. If you cross the river, I'll give you that land, I promise. Here's a second promise. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. That was the promise. Wherever you go, I'm going to give it to you. Here's a third promise. Obey my word, and you will be successful wherever you go. That's a third. Here's a fourth promise. Meditate on my word, and you will be prosperous. The Bible keeps reminding us that what God did before, he will do it again. And when you start reading the Bible in Genesis chapter 13, God makes a promise to Abraham. He says, I have a land for you, and I'm going to give it to you. In Genesis chapter 26, he says to Abraham's son Isaac, he says, I have a land that I'm promising to you. I'm going to give it to you. To Isaac's son, Jacob, he makes the same promise in Genesis 28. There's a land I'm promising to you. When God speaks to Moses through the burning bush, he says, I'm going to give you this land. This is Exodus 3:17. I promise I will bring you up out of your misery in Egypt and into this land of Canaan. That's a promise. And so now God is keeping that promise. When God makes a promise, he keeps it. Joshua is a book and a story about people claiming the promises of God. And I wonder today, are you claiming the promises of God? The Bible is filled with those promises. And if you need courage today, if you're facing something that's daunting and creating fear and anxiety in your life, begin to claim the promises of God. All right, I want to end with this thought this morning, and it's this. Courage, and we've been saying take courage today. Courage is contagious. I want to go back to our text to verse 10, because not only does God fill Joshua with courage, but now Joshua is trying to fill everyone around him with courage. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go into and take possession of the land that the Lord God is giving you. So I want to remind all of you here this morning that your courage inspires others. Joshua is taking courage, and he's always been courageous. Now he's trying to inspire others. Can I say, mothers and fathers, your courage inspires others. All of you who are leaders in your workplace, your courage inspires others. If you are a teacher, if you're an educator, your courage inspires others. If you have friends, that's everybody here, your courage inspires your friends. Courage is contagious. I've learned that courage is contagious because I think I've learned just a little bit of that from my own parents. For example, 2 years ago, we started Justice College, September 1st, 2021. And coming into, and by the way, today, as we start our third year of classes at Justice College, we have 114 students. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? Praise God. And I love it when they're here at the Grove with us. By the way, our soccer team is here today, and they beat ASU 1-0. I just had to share that. That's not, I told you that before. It's Jesus over the devil. That's what's happening there. That's not, by the way, it's not in my notes. I just had to mention that. It's too good. Where was I? Courage. That's good. That's good. So we're starting Justice College in the fall of 2021. That summer, a reporter from the Arizona Republic calls me and he says, hey, I hear you're starting a college at the Grove. Can I come talk to you about that? And so he comes over and we meet in my office and he starts asking strange questions. I thought he was excited about this college, but instead he's saying, what makes you think you can start a college? He almost says it kind of like this. What right do you have to start a college? And he says, what do you know about starting a college? I said, well, here's what I know. I watched my parents for 40 years, 50 years start colleges in Africa. I learned a lot from my parents. And so after watching them build 3 colleges, I think we can do one here. Well, I don't know if he liked that answer or not. So he leaves my office, And I don't know what kind of story he's going to write about this college that's being started at the Grove Church. The next day, the director of higher education in Arizona, who I had gotten to know, he calls me and he said, hey, just so you know, a reporter from the Arizona Republic called me and he says, what right does the people of the Grove have to start a college? And the director of higher education in Arizona, he said, I told him that you have every right to start a college. He said, in fact, I told him anyone in Arizona can start a college. You just need to build a faculty, have the right facilities. You need to start pursuing accreditation. But you, Palmer, he says, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing everything you need to right now. You're doing everything right. Whatever story this guy writes, you keep doing what you're doing at Justice College. And so we kept going. We take courage. And the guy didn't have a story. He never did print it, never did publish it. I don't know what his story was, but he didn't like it. But I knew that we could start a college here only because I'd watched my parents, my father and my mother, start a college. I'm saying that to say to you, fathers and mothers, your children are watching you. Your courage inspires them. Your lack of courage discourages them. I want to say to all of you leaders here, among your friends in your workplace, your courage inspires those around you. So take courage. If you are a parent here today, can I say mothers and fathers, start telling more stories of courage in your home from the Bible. Read your children the stories of Esther and Deborah. Tell them the stories of David and Jonathan and Gideon. Remind your children of Joshua and Caleb, because courage is contagious. Don't hold it on the inside. People follow courage. If you're leading today in whatever capacity, people follow courage. Courage means that you are willing to do the uncomfortable thing. There are not too many great leaders out there. Do you know why? Because leading is uncomfortable. Making change is uncomfortable. Doing something new is uncomfortable. It all takes daring courage. If you have fear, it's okay. It just means that you need God right next to you. It means that you need to come alive to his presence and his promises. So be bold, be brave, and take courage. I'm going to end with this. Many of you know the name Sarah Groves. She's a musician, and maybe you've heard her songs on K-Love or Air One. She's very gifted. And Sarah Groves does a lot of work with IJM, International Justice Mission. And she tells a story of a young woman in Thailand her name is Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth was 14 years old, some IJM, International Justice Mission, workers found her living and trapped in a brothel in Thailand. And so the IJM workers went to the Thai police and they said, there's young women underage being held in this brothel. Can you come set them free? And so the IJM workers went into the brothel with these Thai police, and they found Elizabeth there. They went in her bedroom, and they started very quickly, hurriedly trying to help Elizabeth pack up her belongings. And they saw this on the wall. Written over Elizabeth's bed was a Bible verse that Elizabeth had painted on the wall. And here's the verse. She had these words painted over her bed: "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is a stronghold of my life. Whom shall I be afraid?" They freed Elizabeth that day. In fact, they even brought her back to the U.S. to heal. And Sarah Groves got to know her. And then Sarah, with IJM, they asked if she would share her story at churches. And the first time they asked her to share her story, they said, "Well, Elizabeth, can you share that Bible verse that you had painted over your bed in that brothel in Thailand?" And Elizabeth said, "No, I can't share that." She said, "I was a prisoner then." She said, "I'm free now. So God has given me a new verse." And here it is, Psalm 34:17. "The righteous will cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and the Lord saves those who are crushed in spirit." I share that only to say we all have those fears that crush us in spirit. And I don't know what fears are overwhelming you today, but my invitation to you today is to take courage. Know that God is present. Know that He has promises for you. So take courage today.